Alright, so the next step is to bring these files that we just exported into Substance Designer. The template files, 1 through 16, the number at the end indicate how many layers the texture will have. For the Spider Queen, there's actually 16 layers, which is the maximum number. So I'm going to bring that over there, make a copy of it, and we're going to rename it. Definitely after the spider number, which is similar to the original spiders, which are right here, Spider 1, Spider 2, Spider 3. We're going to need something designated as your own if you're creating one that you're going to be selling through my site in the asset store. So in this case, I'm just going to name it set2, and I'm going to bring this into a text editor. This will open up the file. Obviously, it's a bunch of data that is important for Substance Designer. You could parse this out if you want, but what we're interested in is this mymat1 and mymat2, etc. to 16. So I'm going to go ahead and find all mymat16. I'm going to start with 16 rather than 1 because if I do search for mymat1, then I'll get everything from 10 and above as well. I'm going to replace that with the name of the layer. I've written down the layers on a piece of paper, so I know that mymat16 is actually head accent. In this, we're not going to have any spaces, and we want to capitalize the words so it's a little easier to read. We're just going to say replace all. I'm going to do that to all of the layers. Alright, so we're going to save that. Some best practices. If you're going to be using masks in this file, you'll want to keep those at the end. So group all the masks at the end. It'll make it easier later when you're in Designer rather. And also, whenever possible, use the real names for things like the pedipalps and cheliceras. Those are things you might have to look up on Wikipedia or whatnot. But it's helpful to have the real names of things rather than made-up names. And also, if you're doing something that already has an existing setup like the spiders or the dragon or something, it's best to copy the names that we've given it previously as well. So once you're done with that, you've saved the file. We're just going to double click this and open it up in Substance Designer. First thing I'm going to do is suspend the engine. That'll help speed things up, and I'm going to right click on the name here, object_1, and rename this to be spider3_set2, basically the same name but without the SFB v1 there, and then I'll save that as well. If you notice in the input parameters, these are all going to be preset up for you. Now that we've renamed the mymat numbers, we've got all the different layers here, and you're pretty much not going to really excuse me. You're pretty much not going to really mess with any of these. You might play with the mask fuzziness for those for the mask files that we're going to use rather than the color ID layers. And you can add and remove things if you need to, but for the most part, unless you're going to add something or you really know that whatever you're creating just does not use at all something, then don't delete anything. It's best to not delete something, but you can certainly add things and modify things if you see fit. So the first thing I'm going to do is bring in the files. I'm going to bring in the, just drag them in over here. In this version, for some reason, bringing in files is kind of a pain, as PNG files are not accepted in the load menu, so you have to do this drag and link process. Alright, you'll notice at the top of the input parameters we have the damage blend here, and that's going to be the slider between the old and the new versions of the texture. So if we zoom in close here, these main maps are this row right here, close to the left, almost all the way to the left. And as you can see, it's just red. What we're going to do is bring in our base color up here, our base color _1, which is our old one. Then we're going to attach these to this next node. The old is always going to be on top, so these are going to cross over. I like to bring the new on top here and the old on the bottom, and then cross them over right there. And we're going to do the same thing with the other nodes as well. For the metal rough, just take all these. I'm going to hit D to de-dock, undock those, bring them over here. Now we've got access to the roughness and metallic. And if any of these maps that you import are color, click the grayscale, or if they're grayscale, click the color when appropriate. Since we have no metallic values on the spider, we're going to create a uniform color node, set to grayscale just to black. That way we don't need to use the map to tell it that there's no metal. For the AO, shift and drag this to re-link it to the new node. And the AO is going to be the same for the old and the new. For many situations, the height is not required. You can include it if you'd like. For characters, it's generally not required. There's not much data there, and we don't really use it in the parallax mapping in the shader. But in some shader cases, you might need that. We've got the position right here, that's a requirement. Color ID right here, that's also a requirement. And world space normals is a requirement as well. If you have a rune mask for any situation, that's when a user can apply the rune and create like a symbol or something, you would put that right here on this node. The custom mask is set for users to allow a custom mask inside Unity. Right now this node is just a black, so if you have a rune mask, put it there. Copyright words and mask. Now remember that these work is actually copyright SF-based studios, and while you have the right to modify it and sell it through my site and the asset store under a license that I provide, you do not own the copyright to the work. So that's important, but if you do add a copyright, you would find a blank spot in the texture set. Let's see, perhaps this one is very filled. Perhaps right down here at the very bottom or something, and you would put mask, a black and white mask, and then the words with, again, black and white there, and it will put it on all the maps, and it won't affect the model. But keep in mind you don't have copyright, that's important. Alright, now that we've got those set up, you can actually ignore these extra nodes on the side. You can delete them if you want, but there's really no reason to. It's just going to get removed when we build it anyways. So this is each layer. If you want to break it down and go check out what the SFB section adjuster does, you can. But suffice to say that each color in the color ID has its own layer. Each one can be adjusted independently, and then through the color ID, you can see that right here. Right here, this goes to the color ID. They get recombined into a single texture set. In many cases, the color ID is all you need to make that, and if that were the case, we can save it and export this right now. All we had to really do was bring in the maps. It's quite easy because all the hard work has already been done for you. But since this character does use these 4 mask files, we're going to do it slightly differently. And the reason why we're doing the mask file instead of the color ID is that it's very difficult to get this look through the color ID because we have some gradients in the gray. The color ID has to be solid colors, and here you wouldn't be able to get that look from that color ID map, and so you get a much more pleasing result if you use the masks that were created when you created the texture itself. And so we've got these 4 sections here. The head accent goes on top of the head and the body, and the leg connections go on top of the legs and the body, specifically the body, not the abdomen. The head accent again is also not the abdomen, just the body. Underside goes on the body and the abdomen, and the top side goes on the body and the abdomen. So we're going to need to do a slight modification to this section right up here in order to get this working. What we're going to be using is these top 4 ones, so I'm just going to bring those over so I know what I'm doing there. And I'm going to create here by hitting the space bar. I'm going to do a material blend. Just type that in there. And in each one of these, I'm going to have one of these. So in my list here, I've got the leg connections on the bottom. So I'm going to add that there, and with that, I'm going to add a levels node. And then while we're here, I'm going to go to my values. The level in mid, I'm going to set that to leg connection mask fuzziness. Just going to wait for that to find. There you go. The mask fuzziness. And now I'm going to do the next one, which is top side. Again, add, let me set this to grayscale first. Set this to levels and values. Level in mid, I'm going to do this to top side, mask fuzziness. I'm going to do the next one to the underside and then the head accent as well. Alright, now I'm going to connect, well, I'm going to do, first I'm going to set the channels here. So I'm going to set the channels to, I'm going to need base color, normal, roughness metallic, ambient, occlusion height, and emissive. Now these are going to be roughly in the same order. Emissive gets switched to everything else is going to be in the same order. I'm going to duplicate this for each one. That way I don't have to reset the channels for each one. I'll just hold them up there for now. Every once in a while I'll save just to make sure I actually get saved. And we're going to bring the this node, the levels from the bitmap mask to our grayscale mask here. And we're going to be whatever, this is a section adjuster, so this is the adjusted version of the map, the texture set. So we're going to bring this to the top. And I'm just going to connect these over there. Keep in mind they are in the same order on both sides, so you don't have to really read things. Just remember that the emissive gets switched. Everything else is in the same order. You can, of course, hit the 3 button and use the material, but in those cases, always go back to 1 and make sure that the connection is correct. And I'll do that here because bring that over there to the top. If you hit 1, you see emissive is not connected, so you'll need to connect that. Alright, we've done that to all 4 of those, and now let's set up the linking with the rest of the texture. So this first one is leg connection, and we know that that's going to affect the legs and the body, and those are 2 separate sections in our color ID, so I'm going to have to make a duplicate of this, and it's all copied as well. All the connections are copied as well. I'm going to bring these down all the way, all the way down here in order to connect them to my body, which is the first layer, and the legs, which is the 3rd layer. So I'm going to bring this here, this here. I'll hit 3 just to make it a little bit faster for myself. Connect that. Connect this one, and then hit 1 because, again, the emissive value, if it's being used, is not going to be connected. But even if it's not being used, it's good to connect it. And then I'm going to hold the Shift key. The idea behind the mask is instead of replacing it with a color ID file, replacing that area of the texture with the color ID file, we're going to layer it on top of the other layers. So in this case, we're going to layer the adjusted leg connections on top of the body and on top of the legs. So once we have this blend here, we're going to move these exports. These go directly to the combiner node. We're going to move these over here. So I'm going to hold down the Shift key and drag this over. You'll notice that as I do this, the entire structure gets moved except for this one node connection line right there, because Designer is smart enough to know that you don't mean to actually reconnect it to itself. So you're just connecting those right there. And now we've got the connection there. We're going to do the same to the legs. Alright. And now I'm going to move both of these back up to the top. Keep it organized. I'll put the bottom one on the bottom, the top one on the top. Now we're going to move to the next layer, which is the top side. Top side takes into account the body, which we have right here, and the abdomen, which we don't yet have. So I'm going to make a duplicate of this, and keep the bottom one here, and the top one I'm going to bring down and connect the abdomen like I just did with the body and the legs for the previous layer. The abdomen, of course, is the second layer, which I refer to my list for that. Again, you'll want to double check the connections if you use the grouping at once. There was the outgoing connection from this node and the emissive that weren't connected properly. So I'm going to bring this back to the top. Alright, so now I'm keeping track of this only in my head. This is the body and the abdomen. And since I know the bottom one here is the body, I know that I'm going to need to connect this body to that body. So the output of this body on the previous layer is going to be put on the input of the next layer up. And the outputs from that layer are going to be transferred, holding the shift key, to that layer as well. Hit 1 again to make sure everything transferred over. In this case, it did because they have the exact same structure. And now, for the body, this layer is going to be pasted on top. Then this layer will be pasted on top. And then the output will go down all the way, if you see the highlighted line, to the bottom of the combiner node right here, this giant custom combiner node, which again, it's just a multi-material blend, this large multi-material blend node. And so we're going to do a very similar thing here with the body and the abdomen. Since the abdomen, this is the first layer that's getting a mask on top of the abdomen, so we don't need to worry about the rest. And we will now move to the next one, which is the underside. The underside also has 2 layers. We have the body and the abdomen as well for the underside. So just like I did with the previous layer, I'm going to copy those to this layer as well. So I'll use the make sure everything copied properly. It did. Now the outputs are coming from this layer. That was easy because we already had them all set up, so it was easy just to move it over. And finally, the head accent takes into account just the body. So we only need this one, and we only need to copy the body, which is the lower of the 2 here, and hold shift to relink the output of that. Double check to make sure it transferred properly. It did. And we are all set now with that section of the updates. Alright, so save as always. And now we need to remove these links here. This is the combiner, the multi-material blend, that takes into account the color ID. On our top 4 channels, we are not actually using anything from the color ID. We're not actually using any of those values entirely. So I'm going to select the top 4 of these here. Just hit delete all the links to them. Make sure you don't accidentally delete more. It's sometimes, especially here, they start, shifting, and so you can accidentally delete some. So be careful about that. You want to make sure that you don't delete the base color of number 12. So 13, 14, 15, 16, and then in this node, change this just to 12 materials. That'll adjust that, and now we are all set. Well, actually, no, we're not all set. One more step. Click here to load all the default data on the right here. For my computer, it'll take a minute to process it, I suppose. And then for those 4 sections that use the mask, starting with the leg connections, on the mask fuzziness, we want to set the default to 0.5. That way, the mask is at normal value. The mask fuzziness for these ones don't affect the color ID, but they do affect the mask itself, and the users can make it less strong in using that level slider that we set for the mask fuzziness. So we want to set that there. Everything else, I find it easier to test the results inside Unity. Unity's a little faster with this. So I like to just export the sbsar file. You don't need to add anything to the name. The name should stay the same, so just hit the save button. If you've already saved one before, you can overwrite it if you so choose. But you don't need to add any version numbers. That's something I used to do, but I dropped the idea because it got annoying. And updates in Unity were more difficult because you had to relink all the files. So that'll take just a minute to export. Alright, once that's exported, you'll also want to do one more export. Again, right click here. We're going to export with dependencies. This is for users to use in their own workflow so they can customize things should they so choose. So I've got none here. I'm going to create a new folder, spiders, pack, PBR, substance designer, and I'm actually going to call this spiders, pack, PBR set2. Custom name there, substance designer, create that. I'm going to save this file into that that folder. That way users will be able to, if they have substance designer and the desire to look at this graph, they'll be able to load this up in designer and modify it if they need to. You're going to also want to have one for painter as well. I already have one here, but I need to actually rename this to set2, and you're going to keep your painter files there as well. And try to copy the substance notes text file there, and that just makes sure it's a little note about the copyright and also the usage of it. So that's all you have to do. Obviously, double check to make sure the graph works as promised inside Unity. Adjust all the settings to make sure the layers work properly. That's the most important thing. If you made any mistakes here in this process, they'll show up. If you sometimes it's relatively easy to link these to the wrong nodes, and if you do that, that might show up in your testing. So that type of thing is important to test. Other than that, you can save and quit, and you're all done. So if you have any questions, let me know. The entire process isn't that difficult, especially if you know how to use the applications. It should be pretty easy to create new textures. Easy for you, hard for people who don't know the program or who don't have the artistic eye that you do. And that's why we're making it available for people to update and pay you to do this for them. So if you have any questions, let me know. Have a great day.